First up, Paul, what was the main reason behind your purchase of an EV, and would you say that it was based on emotion or sensibility? What was your thinking?
I Really, the reason I wanted an EV is that it's time to move into the EV market. And, if anyone can buy it, we're in a position where we could buy an EV, and it was part of setting an example as well. But it's the time where people need to start to transition into the electrification of our world.
How long had you been thinking about it, and did you have that argument with yourself where you thought, are we ready for an EV yet, or should we buy our last internal combustion engine vehicle? Was it a difficult one?
No, it was. We were ready. We had to give up our previous car. It was a lease car, so it was time to get another car, and we were going to get an EV. It was just a matter of how long we had to wait for an EV. So I really was determined to get an EV and move across into the EV, field.
Did you know anyone who had one before you got one, and had you tapped into anybody else's experiences?
Well, I've been researching. I looked at the Polestar. I looked at the Kia. I was thinking of the Atto. The Volvo just seemed like a really nice car, so we ended up with the Volvo. Sorry, what was the question again?
The question was whether you knew anyone who had one. So had you spoken to people who had one?
Not really.
Okay, yeah.
There weren't that many on the market. Quite a few of my friends were waiting on Teslas. Right. Quite a few of my friends were waiting on other EVs. We were just joining the list of people waiting for an EV.
And you said there you'd done a lot of research, which a lot of people do before they go into an EV purchase.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself knowledgeable on them before you made the purchase? Did you have a fair bit of background on them?
Look, I wouldn't consider myself knowledgeable. I've got a basic understanding of, what does it mean when you get an EV in terms of charging? What does it mean in terms of maintenance? What does it mean in terms of just the general running of the car? And all the ticks were there for an EV. I don't have to get my car serviced for 2 years. And when I get it serviced, it's air filters and wipers, and that's it. There were some really appealing things like that. And I drive around now and I see dirty smoke coming out the back of the car, and I go, I don't contribute any more to that. We're making it, it's just, that's where we need to go.
Did you take one for a test drive beforehand, or had you been a passenger in one, or had you had
just a passenger?
Okay.
Yeah. I think it was about 6 years ago. It must have been when Teslas first came out. We got an Uber once, and we went into this, Tesla, and I went, wow, this is the future. So I've been, keen to get one when they were available years ago. It was just a matter of time before the supply was there.
I suspect I know the answer to this one, but I assume the long-term future of the environment, and as you just said, making a difference, came into your decision-making process?
Absolutely. I'm a teacher. I've been conscious of climate change and working with our youth, and that's a major concern for them. I've got 5 children and 3 grandchildren. I'm really conscious that this is a major issue, and it's certainly been a major issue for 20, 30 years, 40 years. We started talking about climate change, and finally we're really seeing politicians take notice.
You've had your EV for a little while now. What have you noticed that's different about your daily routine? Has it changed anything significant about your life, or has it made no difference at all?
I feel funny when I go into petrol stations to pick up some milk or something or other. Yeah. I'm not there to, maybe check the tyres. That's about the only thing I go to a petrol station for anymore. That's the biggest change. I drive past them all. When I first got it, there was a bit of range anxiety, getting used to the idea of having to be aware of the charge and charging up. But it's now just part of the norm. It gets down to 40%, whack it into the 7 kilowatt charger we've got at home.
I think you're at the point where you're now starting to consider changing your second car to an EV if you can get your hands on one, the family car. Yeah. If you're in a situation right now where this Volvo would have been your primary car, would you have still bought an EV right now, or was there a bit of, I guess, safety in the fact that you still had another vehicle if something was difficult with owning an EV?
No, we would have gone for the EV because of those environmental issues, and having driven one, I've really only driven the Volvo as an EV mostly. It's a very smooth drive. It feels like a car. It's not trying to be something different. We're at a stage in our lives where we don't need a big car anymore. We've been through the Tarago, the big cars with lots of kids. We don't need as huge a car anymore. So it was time for us to, transition.
What was the most recent car you replaced? Was it petrol or diesel? Was it an SUV?
It was a petrol. It was petrol.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you've explained this, but you've got a property in the country and you're set up to charge both in the city and in the country at your own home, right? When you need to. Yep. So 7 kilowatt chargers at each end.
7 kilowatt chargers at each end. It fills up the battery, in a few hours. Charge it overnight. It's pretty easy. I've got solar down in our other property in Southern Highlands. So during the day, it's using the solar, which is another consideration.
Yep.
It's not very expensive. I've used fast chargers on drives where you have to have the apps. That was all, it was getting used to all that sort of stuff that was the big difference.
To that point, is there an app that's your go-to app, or do you have a couple of apps that you use? And do you find yourself using a particular brand or company's charger when you're out on the road, or is it just whatever's available to you?
Whatever's available, and within the range that I need it to get to. I drive up the coast once a month. I use ChargeFox, I use PlugShare, and I use the EV. ChargeFox seems to be pretty easy to use, and they've got the association with NRMA at the moment. So there's a couple of stations where it's still free, but the ultra-fast charger I filled up in 15 minutes for $23, which is still about a third of the price of petrol.
And where were you at? Like 60% battery, 40%? Do you remember approximately?
I've been down to 20%.
Yep.
I've been down to 17%. Usually, I have a stop off halfway up the coast. I'm around 40%.
How often are you charging in total? So in terms of home, property in the country, on the road, are you plugging the car in every day on average for a little bit of time, or is it a couple of times a week? What do you reckon?
Usually, no, it's 1 or 2 times a week.
Okay.
Particularly when I'm in the city, obviously. If I'm just driving around the city, it's really only once a week. Short trips, doesn't use up a lot. It's only when I'm driving up the coast or inland that I'm charging each day, because I'm travelling those distances necessary.
You mentioned this before about the cost. Assume you had to pay, I don't know, $50 or $60 to go from 20% to 100%. Would that have deterred you from buying an EV to start with? Or was there any thought that some of the public charging infrastructure is free, you've got solar panels, effectively that's free once you've set it up for yourself. If you had to pay straight off the bat, would that have weighed into your decision at all?
Not really. It's still going to be cheaper.
Yeah.
And as we transition to renewables, it's going to be better for the environment anyway. So it wasn't really a major consideration.
And I think you answered this when you said 17% is about as low as you got, but you haven't run out of charge yet, right? Like you haven't had an issue
haven't ever run out of charge.
Yep.
I mean, all the technology in the cars will let you know. You put in your destination, and it estimates what your battery charge is going to be at the end of that trip and for the return. So you can see it very clearly. You don't have to work it out anymore. It's all there, so you can just plan your trip and know that you have to make a stop, or you'll make it all the way there and plug in when you get there.
you've got solar panels at your property, so
Yeah.
that weighs into it for you as well, obviously. I assume the way you would see it, that'd be part of the solution moving forward, right? That more of us have solar.
Yes, Australia is one of the biggest solar users in the world in terms of having it on their rooftops. It's going to be a natural transition. The problem's going to be for those in strata and apartments and trying to access the infrastructure. That's the big thing that needs to change in terms of providing for people in apartment blocks and working out the logistics of when you've got 20 people who want to charge a car, they need to have shared chargers.
Yeah, how do you manage
They're
it?
available.
Yeah.
That was probably where I spent quite a bit of time researching which charger to get. There's so many different
Yeah,
types.
it's true, yeah.
And the cost involved in those and the installation cost in those. Do you get one that is a card that makes people pay for it? If you want to share it.
So if other people want to use it, yeah.
Yeah, other people can use it. That was a consideration because our Airbnb, people might want to do it.
Yeah, good
We
point.
weren't going to just charge them for 20. You don't charge them for the use of the hot water and the gas.
Yeah. Fair point. Have you got exactly the same charger at both ends?
No, I got different chargers.
Okay, and what educated that decision?
One was I bought one for here that was a little bit more expensive, the one that I'm going to use more often. And
yeah.
I just found another one that was advertised, seemed okay. It works fine. The cable's a little bit thinner. Not sure if that makes a difference to the charging, but yeah, they both work fine.
Both work fine. Any experience yet with servicing? Have you had it back to the dealer to have the car checked or any of that stuff at all yet, or you're still in the preliminary phase?
Still in the preliminary phase.
Yeah.
I mean, press the screen, you're going to go to range assistance or system or car status, click on service, it says the service isn't due for another year and a half. That's the first service.
That's the first service, exactly. Any challenges owning it? So is there anything that you've looked at and gone, I wish it did this, or that's not how I thought it would be? Anything like that at all?
In terms of the EV itself, no. A couple of little things in terms of the car styling, perhaps. The hooks to hang your clothes on when you pick them up with the dry cleaner is a little bit awkward to use.
Yep.
Just there's a few little things, but nothing really.
Nothing about it being an EV specifically?
No, nothing about it being an EV.
And when you did the research, because this is something that interests me specifically, was it all online, mainly online? Where did you go? Did you go to a place like Drive, where we test drive everything? Did you go to places that just review electric vehicles? What was your research?
It was places like Drive
Yep.
that were reviewing. I watched numerous reviews of the various EVs that are out there and the comparisons of them.
Yep.
It was about availability, researching that. That was, primarily it was newspaper articles, research on the cars themselves, reviews, particularly.
I assume that price plays a part. We're at a point at the moment, though, where certain electric vehicles, outside of the ultra expensive stuff, hover around a certain amount of money.
That's right.
So I would assume price plays a part, but not in the same way it does when you're researching a conventional vehicle and you've got a hard $25,000 you can spend, for argument's sake. But to what extent did you sort of say, this is how much money I want to spend, and that's the window I'm working within?
Yeah, very much so.
Right.
It was up to a certain amount of money,
Yep.
and what comes in under that. And there was a range of vehicles that were in that price range.
Was there anything that you said it has to be able to do this? Did you say, for argument's sake, it must have this much power, or it must have this much range, or was there anything that you sort of really had?
Range was one of the the issues you were looking at. It wanted to be able to go as far as it could.
Yeah.
And they all seem to be around the same.
Yeah.
And I think it's a little bit less when you start driving it. I didn't quite understand kilowatt hours until I really got it and was using the car and it started off at like 23, but that was the car just sorting out its usage in the way I drive.
Yep.
And it's down to 18.3 now,
pretty good.
which is
18's pretty
not
good.
bad
Yep.
for 100 Ks.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty good. Absolutely.
So it was size of the battery.
Yep.
Was a consideration. Like I didn't want to, because I had to drive up the coast regularly. I didn't want a Nero, for instance. It was 240 range.
Yeah.
It needed something that was almost double that.
Yeah, closer to 500.
Yeah.
Anything with the ownership experience where you went, oh, that's cost more than I thought or less than I thought, or is it pretty much based on the research you did, you're happy with where you're at?
Very happy with where we're at. Love driving it. Really smooth drive. There isn't any cost involved. You know, just charging it up.
Yeah.
And drives itself.
Aside from not stopping in at petrol stations when the fuel light comes on, what's it changed about your day-to-day driving? Is it you obviously feel good because you've made the decision to do what you're doing and you're doing what you want to
Yeah.
be doing. So there's obviously a satisfaction that comes from that. But has it changed? Do you sort of look at being more efficient with the way you drive, or do you watch the energy consumption, little things like that?
Look, the one pedal drive is really enjoyable. I find, I've driven down to the Southern Highlands without using the brake.
You get used to it, don't you?
You do.
Yeah.
You get very used to it. Like driving a go-kart is the way I try to explain it to other people. They go, what do you mean you don't use the brake? I don't have to use the brake because the car stops.
Yeah.
And the adaptive cruise control I just love. It keeps you in your lane, it slows down behind cars, it speeds up when they move away. It tells you to keep your hands on the steering wheel. Otherwise, you could just sit there. It's pretty lovely. I do find that technology, and the technology in the cars is fantastic.
Yeah, new cars, absolutely. Yeah. If we look at a snapshot of your driving over the course of a month, you go up the coast one way, once a month you go down to the country the other way
Once a week.
What would you call your day-to-day stuff? So with those two taken into account, what's your day-to-day stuff? Is it just running around town?
Just running around town.
Yep.
Yep.
Short stuff to and from?
Yeah, short stuff to golf or to work.
Yeah. Take the grandkids
to shops.
somewhere?
Yeah, well, generally don't take the grandkids. We're not having a car seat in there if it can help it.
It's just an adult's car, that one.
That's right. We did have 5 in it yesterday.
Yes, so that's good. Filled it right up.
Yeah.
You've answered this question as well, but you've probably done, I would say, judging by what you've said, a little bit more long distance driving more regularly than the average EV owner would, I think.
Possibly, yeah. I would think so. I mean, I'm a member of the Volvo Facebook group, and there's lots of people that do quite a bit of driving on them. And we, explore issues. It's a great forum for discussion and those sorts of things. I probably drive it more than most for the longer range. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Off the top of your head, actually, before I ask that question, just safety. Volvo has a decades-long reputation for safety. It's one of the things they put at the forefront of everything they do. The brand unequivocally says it will never take shortcuts with safety, and it's very important. Was safety high on the consideration set for you, and did you feel that a Volvo was a smart choice because of the safety element of it?
Well, the Volvo became available, and we all went, it's a Volvo. It has a reputation for that. So we felt safe buying it in both the sense of safety and the reputation that it had. And I do feel like I've backed out of something, backed out of a driveway, and a car's come behind and it slammed on the brake.
Yep.
So it said, you're not driving into that car. You do get some of those safety features that you go, oh, that's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Any things that you dislike about having an EV at this point, sort of in the early phase? Pretty happy with it?
Yeah, very happy with it.
Yep.
Would never go back to a combustion engine, I don't think.
Counter argument to that is the advantages.
The advantages?
Yeah.
The advantages are ease of, I just plug it in at home. I don't have to worry about getting petrol or the cost of fuel or those sorts of issues. Otherwise, it's just like having, it's just a different type of car. It's a very smooth drive. It's very responsive because it's, one pedal, there's a word for it, where it's just immediate reaction. There's no chicken.
There's no lag.
There's no lag.
Yeah.
There's no going through the gears.
That's right.
Or I did have a diesel car that, you put your foot down, there's a tiny bit of lag for it. It's straight off the mark. And we've only got the single engine. It's more than I need.
It's fast enough, isn't
It's plenty fast enough.
Yep.
I think the twin would scare me, it'd be too fast.
Would you, so two answers to this. Right now, who would you recommend an electric vehicle to, and who would you not recommend an electric vehicle to? There's usage sets for both, I guess, still.
Yeah. If you're driving around the city, you should really consider getting an EV.
Yep.
I get it for people that need a bigger car to transport stuff. There's still a way to go before they get into the EVs and are dealing with that market efficiently. There's no big utes that will get the distance that tradespeople need for their vehicles. But if you're just driving around the city, you should really consider it. And hopefully that price range will come down and make it a lot more appealing for a lot more people. And that's, I think, the big change that needs to happen. But we should all be driving EVs.
Some of this we spoke about off camera, but the last couple of questions are a little bit future looking. What do you see the future looking like, first of all? Because you've got a window into it. You're living it every time you drive your car. What does the future look like to you?
I think the future looks like a big transition in the next 10 years to EVs everywhere. And it will, I used to ride my bike and I get stuck behind a car or a bus that's, belching out smoke and I'm breathing it in.
Yep.
It'll be so much cleaner. Our streets will be cleaner, there'll be a lot less pollution. It'll be just so much better. The big questions are infrastructure. Need to build the infrastructure to be able to provide people in strata accommodation with access to chargers. There needs to be the infrastructure out in the country to be able to provide people with charging opportunities where you don't have to queue and wait for 10 cars. I mean, that's going to be the big question and the big problem, the challenge. Once that is available, it's a big transition. And the next big one will be trying to deal with the larger vehicles, trucks, the buses, those sorts of things. Once they can be electrified, it'll make a big difference.
We did speak about this off camera. What would you say to governments, whether they're local, state, federal, as someone now who's owned an EV, who's been driving the EV, charging the EV, you've mentioned infrastructure. I think that's the big key, but what would you say to governments from your experience now as an owner?
Yeah, really try to encourage the uptake of EVs through policy, either emissions targets, providing a better environment or subsidies for particularly getting cheaper EVs on the market, and infrastructure, supporting companies, supporting the production of the infrastructure up and down the highways, out into country areas, making it accessible, not tucked away somewhere where it's hard to find and you feel a bit isolated. There's a couple of places I've charged that I wouldn't want to be doing it at midnight.
Absolutely.
Bit scary.
We have as well, yeah. If you're a woman on your own, in the pitch black.
Or a man on their own, for that matter too. It's just
right.
it's just
That's
not
a good point.
not a real comfortable place to be standing in the back of a car park, isolated out somewhere with very little light. It needs to be done well and properly.
Yeah, well, petrol stations are lit up like Christmas trees, right?
Yeah,
So,
I want to go somewhere where I feel safe, that I can walk inside and get a coffee, and to be, on that market, BP doing charging stations, they're changing their whole market. They'll have people trapped there for 15, 20 minutes. They'll be able to get other money from them, well as charging up their vehicle.
We visited one of their big ones in Queensland, and it's exactly like that. It's in a petrol station. There's all of the food outlets in there. There's the coffee shop in there. And what are you going to do while you're charging your car? You're going to go in there and spend money, aren't you?
So you plan your trip around that. There's a vineyard up on the way to Port Macquarie that's put in EV charging stations. So you drop in there and you end up buying a case.
Just as long as you don't drink it on the way
That's
home.
right.
The last question I got for you, mate, is just a funny one we're asking everybody. What do you think owning an electric vehicle says about you as the owner? When people look at you, or
Yeah.
your perception outward, what do you think it says about you?
I hope that they think that that person's environmentally conscious
Yep.
and they've made the change. We're in a position where we could, you know, at our stage in life, that we could finally afford an EV. You know, they're available. Hopefully that's their consideration. I'm sure the rest of them think I'm a wanker.
There you go, mate. That's a good note to end on.